My sister pushed a breadbasket toward my son and said, "We didn't order for him." Her voice was calm, like humiliation was just part of the menu. My dad chuckled. "You should have packed him something." Their kids were eating $100 steaks while mine stared at cold bread. I smiled, said one word, noted, and every head at that table turned. They thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Because what happened after that dinner didn't just change our family, it exposed what we'd all been pretending not to see. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, tell me, where are you listening from? So I know I'm not the only one who's had to draw a line with family. When people ask what my family is like, I usually say we're complicated. It's easier than explaining the hierarchy I grew up under, where my parents treated my sister Tessa like glass and me like concrete. I was the stable one, the problem solver, the one they didn't have to worry about. Tessa was the fragile one, the constant work in progress everyone needed to protect. When we were kids, I'd hear my mom say, "Aubrey's strong, she doesn't need much love." I laughed it off back then, thinking strength was something to be proud of. But strength has a price. It means when you finally break, no one believes you can. I'm 35 now, a single mom with a 9-year-old son named Ethan. He's quiet, observant, the kind of kid who notices everything but says little. I work as an administrative manager at a charter school in Tempe, Arizona. My days are made of emails, lesson schedules, and PTO meetings, nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps us safe. My parents live 30 minutes away in Phoenix in the same house I grew up in. The wallpaper hasn't changed since the 90s, and neither have they. My dad still believes discipline is love, and my mom still believes silence keeps peace. I used to visit every Sunday until the emotional math stopped adding up. The small talk, the sideways comments, the subtle digs that left me drained for days. Tessa. She's the golden child who never seems to run out of second chances. She's gone from job to job, boyfriend to boyfriend, always starting over. My parents call her brave for trying new things. When I pay her rent or pick up her kids from school, they call me responsible. It's funny how the same act can mean charity for one and duty for another. So when my parents invited me to their 45th anniversary dinner, I wanted to believe it was a truce. My mom's text said, "Just family, nothing fancy." I offered to book the restaurant, a nice steakhouse in Scottsdale with soft lighting and private rooms. I even found a company to restore their wedding photo from 1978, framed it beautifully. I thought maybe for one night we could all sit at the same table and remember we were on the same side. I didn't realize I was walking straight into a script I'd been cast in since childhood, the one where love had conditions and respect had limits. The night of the dinner, Ethan and I arrived 5 minutes early. He was wearing the little navy blazer I'd ironed that morning, his hair combed just the way he liked it, neat, but not babyish. He gripped my hand as we walked through the heavy glass doors of the steakhouse. I remember the smell of seared meat, the low jazz music, the clink of silverware. It was warm, expensive, almost too polished to feel real. Tessa and her family were already there. Her husband, Doug, had a drink in hand. Their boys were sprawled across the booth, loud and glowing from their tablet screens. Tessa turned, smiled just enough to be polite, and said, "Oh, hey, you made it." She didn't stand up. My mom offered a distracted hug. My dad didn't move at all. No one looked at the gift bag I was holding, the restored wedding photo I'd spent weeks arranging. It sat beside me like an afterthought. I helped Ethan unfold his napkin, pointed at the menu, and whispered, "You can get anything you want." He smiled at the chicken tenders. Simple, safe, something a kid could love. I was just about to wave down the waiter when Tessa leaned over, sliding the breadbasket toward Ethan. "We didn't order for your son," she said. "Mom thought he's a picky eater anyway." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Then my dad added, casual as ever, "You should have packed him something." It wasn't just what they said, it was how easy it sounded. The tone of people so used to dismissing you that they don't even notice anymore. I looked at my mother. She stared into her glass of water like there was something important floating inside. No one else spoke. Ethan's shoulders slumped. He didn't cry. He just stared at the bread like it might disappear if he touched it. Something in me cracked, but not loud. It was quiet, steady, controlled. I realized sitting there that this table had always been the same Tessa, getting seconds me cleaning the crumbs. I smiled. Just one word left my mouth. Noted. The The sound of it seemed to echo longer than it should have. Tessa looked confused. My dad went back to his steak, but Ethan glanced at me, really looked, and in his small, shy eyes, I saw it. He understood that his mother wasn't going to take it anymore. I didn't say another word. I just waited. Waited for the moment to make good on that promise. The waiter came back a few minutes later, his notepad ready, smile polite. "Are we all set to order?" he asked. The air at that table felt heavier than the lighting. I could hear Ethan's quiet breathing beside me. My dad was still cutting his steak, pretending nothing had happened. My mom was scrolling through her phone, and Tessa was whispering something to Doug, probably about me. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor loud enough that every conversation in the private room stopped. Actually, I said calm and steady, cancel any orders that haven't gone to the kitchen yet, and put everything that's already on the way on my father's tab. It's his anniversary after all. You could hear a pin drop. The waiter froze. Tessa's jaw fell open. My dad finally looked up, fork in midair. "And for my son," I continued, "he'll have the ribeye. Medium rare. With truffle fries and a Coke. Make it quick, please." The waiter nodded, eyes wide, and disappeared. Ethan looked at me like he wasn't sure if he should smile. I reached over and broke a breadstick in half, handed it to him. "Eat, honey," I whispered. "We're fine." Doug cleared his throat. "Was that really necessary?" I turned my eyes to him, calm as glass. Yes, it was. No one else spoke. The only sound was the soft clink of silverware from another table through the thin wall. Uncle Frank, my mother's brother, let out one low chuckle from across the room. I hadn't even noticed he and Aunt Laura had joined the dinner late, sitting at the end. Laura's eyes met mine, proud and knowing. She nodded once, like she'd been waiting years to see me do that. Dinner dragged on stiff and silent. Tessa's boys complained their food was taking too long. My dad didn't say another word. My mom tried to smile through the tension, her voice brittle whenever she spoke. When the check arrived, the waiter handed it straight to my father. My dad's face went red, but he didn't argue. As we stood to leave, I reached into the gift bag and pulled out the framed wedding photo I'd restored. It was beautiful sepia tones. Edges smoothed the two of them, smiling like the world was just beginning. I placed it gently on the table. "Happy anniversary," I said softly. Then I took Ethan's hand and walked out. We passed the host stand, the bar, the soft jazz still playing like nothing had happened. Outside, the night air hit cold against my skin. Ethan squeezed my hand. "Mom!" "Yeah." He looked up, small and serious. "You weren't scared." I smiled. "No, baby." I was done. By the time I tucked Ethan into bed that night, my phone was already lighting up calls from Mom, missed FaceTimes from Tessa, one long voicemail from Dad. I didn't listen to any of them. I knew exactly what they'd say. "You embarrassed us. You made a scene. You ruined our dinner." For once, I didn't care. I poured a glass of water, sat on the couch, and let the quiet sink in. The house felt still safe. No one talking over me. No one telling me what I should have done differently. Then my phone buzzed again, a message from Tessa. "You owe Dad for the dinner. $1,200. Pay your share." I stared at it for a long minute, then typed back one word, noted. I didn't hit send. I didn't need to. The next morning, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to see my parents and Tessa standing on the porch. They didn't call first. They never did. Dad was holding an envelope. Mom's lips were pressed so tight they were almost white. Tessa had her arms crossed, her sunglasses still on, though it was cloudy. "Can we come in?" Mom asked already, stepping forward. I didn't answer. I just moved aside. Ethan was sitting on the couch, pretending to play his Switch. He looked up, caught my eyes, then looked back down. He didn't need to see this, but he'd lived through enough of it already to know how it went. Dad placed the envelope on the kitchen counter with a soft thud. "That's the bill from last night. You agreed to pay half. You didn't." I leaned against the counter, calm. "Actually, I didn't agree to that. I offered to host, and you turned it into a public shaming. That was your tab." "You embarrassed the entire family," Mom said, her voice shaking. "In public, Aubrey. People were watching." Tessa cut in sharper. "You're delusional. Everyone's talking about it. You looked crazy." I laughed quietly. "Crazy." "You called my son invisible. Maybe that's what crazy looks like to people who can't handle a mirror." Tessa's mouth opened, but Uncle Frank's truck pulled up before she could speak. I'd called him 15 minutes earlier, said, "They're here." He'd simply replied, "We're on our way." When he and Aunt Laura walked in, the room shifted. My mom's face dropped. Dad's eyes narrowed. Frank nodded at me. "You good?" "Perfect," I said. Laura went straight to the counter, looked at the envelope, then back at my parents. "You really came here to collect money from your daughter after what happened?" "This isn't your business," Mom said quickly. Frank crossed his arms. "It is when you keep pretending one child's worth more than the other." Tessa scoffed. "Oh, please, here we go again, poor perfect Aubrey." I turned to her, my voice level. "You know I've covered your rent for almost a year, paid your electric bill, bought your kids Christmas presents. You never said thank you. You just said you'd pay me back soon." Frank slid a stack of papers across the table, photocopies of payments and transfers. I hadn't told him I was saving them, but Laura had suggested I document everything months ago. Tessa went pale. "You kept records. I keep receipts," I said, "for people who forget how much they take." Mom's hand shot up, trembling. "Enough. This is private family business." Laura cut in, her tone calm but firm, "Then start acting like a family." No one spoke. Even Ethan looked up from the couch. I reached for the envelope on the counter, opened it. Inside was the restaurant invoice, $1,200, neat handwriting at the bottom, "Pay your share." "Aubrey," I pulled $600 in cash from my wallet, placed it on top. "Here's half. Not out of guilt, out of pettiness. I sleep better knowing you didn't get the whole thing." Dad's face flushed red. "You're being disrespectful." "No," I said. "I'm being done." I slid the remaining papers from the folder toward them. Proof of every payment I'd ever made to Tessa, screenshots of messages, even a note from the school counselor confirming Ethan was doing fine after their so-called concern report. Mom's face drained of color. Dad clenched his jaw. Tessa was trembling. "You're pathetic," she said, voice cracking, "dragging everyone down because you can't stand not being the favorite." I stepped closer. "You were always the favorite, Tessa. You just mistook it for love." The room went quiet. Frank nodded once. "That's it. We're done here." I walked to the door, opened it, and waited. It took them a few seconds, but eventually they filed out. My dad first muttering something under his breath. My mom next, eyes wet. Tessa last glaring. When the door closed, I locked it and leaned my forehead against the wood. For a moment, I just stood there breathing. Then my phone buzzed again. A voicemail from an unknown number. I hit play. "This is the Department of Child Services. We received an anonymous report about your son, Ethan. We'd like to schedule a home visit." I froze. By the time the knock came 2 hours later, I'd already cleaned every surface of the house, double-checked. The fridge straightened Ethan's room. The two women at the door were professional calm. They asked questions. They looked around. They smiled at Ethan's art taped to the fridge. One of them said quietly before leaving, "We can tell this was a misunderstanding. You'd be surprised how often family does this." I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. That night, I gathered everything, copies of payments, messages, photos, and one letter I'd found months ago in a box in the garage. My mother's handwriting dated 35 years back. I don't think I'll ever bond with this second child. I'm too tired to try. I scanned the last line over and over until it blurred. That letter wasn't meant for me to find, but it explained everything. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Karen, a friend of Laura's. We filed for a formal cease and desist against my parents, and Tessa citing harassment and false reporting. Karen was quick, efficient, and furious on my behalf. A week later, a letter arrived at my door, this time from their attorney. They were filing for grandparent visitation rights, claiming I was denying them access to Ethan out of spite. Karen read it, smirked, and said, "They don't have a case. Arizona law won't back them. But let's make sure they regret even trying." We filed a full response with evidence attached, proof of harassment. The CPS report marked unfounded the payment trail and that old letter from my mother. 3 days later, the case was dismissed. When I told Ethan, he just nodded. "So they can't bother us anymore." "No, honey," I said. "Not anymore." He smiled, small but real. That evening, as I watched him color at the table, I realized it wasn't revenge. It was rescue. rescue from a family that confused loyalty with obedience and love with control. After the court dismissed their claim, silence finally settled like clean air after a storm. No calls, no messages, just quiet. I changed the locks the same week and updated my will, naming Uncle Frank and Aunt Laura as Ethan's legal guardians if anything ever happened to me. It felt strange, freeing like cutting a rope that had been digging into my wrists for years. Doug Tessa's husband sent a single text 2 days later, a screenshot of a bank transfer, half the rent I'd covered for them. No apology, no words, just numbers. A few minutes after another message came through, "I'm done with her. Take care of yourself." I stared at it for a while before deleting it. He wasn't worth the space in my phone. None of them were. When I saw my mother at the grocery store a week later, she looked smaller, older. She didn't speak. Just stood by the produce section, pretending to compare prices on apples. I walked right past her. For the first time in my life, I didn't stop to make her comfortable. At home, Ethan was on the porch reading. The sunset painted his face in gold and orange. "You seem different," he said quietly. "I am," I told him. I stopped trying to fix things that weren't broken by me. He smiled, leaned against my shoulder, and kept reading. The air was still, peaceful, and for once, no one else had the power to ruin it. A few weeks later, Ethan and I drove north to Prescott, just the two of us. We set up a small camp by the lake-roasted marshmallows and watched the fire crackle against the night. The stars looked endless, untouched by everything we'd left behind. Ethan turned to me, his voice soft. "You seem lighter, Mom." I smiled, watching the flames dance in his eyes. That's what freedom feels like. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just free. If you've ever had to draw a line with family to protect your peace, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Because I know we're not alone.